I just have one question. You alluded briefly to Father's thoughts about what you called Ruthenianism, which I imagine was an allusion to the old Ruthenian Starorusan movement. You talked a lot, obviously, about his work as populist and about his relationship to the Russophile movement, Russophile clergy, and so on. Could you comment briefly on expand on how he interacted with sort of old Ruthenian ideas, and certainly there would have been still many among his contemporaries in the clergy at the time.
Yeah. Okay, so, and you hit on this very complicated problem of what are we going to call the conglomerate of ideas that are not Ukrainian national populists from the other side. So that, we used to have almost a conceptualization of a stage. First there are old Ruthenians, then they become somewhat Russophile, and then you get the so-called Novokursniki, out and out Moscophiles, and this is going on in his time. I don't think anybody had as codified conceptualizations of ideas, right? And the other, from what I pick up from people's relations, the quietist old Ruthenians, who just basically stayed there and didn't want to get involved, were viewed very differently than these new activists who are getting to be involved in Russian causes. Okay, so what are the, and I won't make this too long, what are the issues that hit in Zubrytsky's lifetime? So the one of the major furors in the 1890s in Galicia is the adoption of the phonetic alphabet, right? So the phonetic alphabet had been created for Ukrainian long before it. The Želekhivka existed. Certain publications are being published in it. But there is a great reluctance to adopt the modern phonetic alphabet because some of the priests didn't like it. Because then it would have been harder to read the Church Slavonic text if they didn't have that yach and other such things. So this becomes a problem. So when this hits in 1890-91, the great triumph for the Ukrainian movement is that the education authorities adopt the phonetic alphabet. So once that's going to happen after 1890-91, it is going to go right through. I think we also have to reconceive what problems this caused for people. So there's a wonderful, there's a series of memoirs from the Lavriu monastery, right? And this is, 8 kilometers from Shanets, I don't know, to Lavriu. And one of the people there writes, what the problem I used to have with that old etymological script, how difficult it was to read, and then suddenly I could read, and this went on. But that movement, at a time when there were much political turmoil in Galicia, also evoked a massive movement among these Russophiles to maintain the etymological script. And that created petitions on which the majority of people in many areas who signed the petitions are illiterate. That is, they couldn't have signed the petition. They didn't know how to read and write. But they're mobilizing people. So it's the last big mobilization, I would argue, of the Russophile movement occurs over this etymological script. Zubrytsky is a very practical guy. He basically said, first of all, he believed in scholarship. We would like him because he believed in professors. He said, look, you don't just ask anybody to decide about these things. You call together scholars, they'll get together, they'll deal with this. I publish, and one of the big issues would be when the Ukrainian daily would switch to and it doesn't switch to the late 1890s into the phonetic script. It's having a hard time doing. But what becomes much more apparent in the 1890s is a local issue for Zubrytsky. What he maintains is that in trying to maintain their power, the two starosta, Bilinski in Turka, which he loved to call Turecki Pashlik, and he called him the Pasha of the Pashlik, and then that guy with this echt Polish name Ricci, who was the starosta of Stary Sambir. Right? They've got to somehow maintain their influence. And in that, the Russophile clergy are. Zubrytsky gives us lists. He says, 18 priests are ours, 12 are Russophiles, and 14 will go whichever way it looks better, right? So that's what we're down to now. This is what we're doing. He occasionally does say the younger ones are on our side. I don't know if it can always be proven. His own family, the Boriseviches, were Moscophiles in part. They're reading Halachanin, and so I'm wondering how he got along with his brother-in-laws. That's what I mean, the things you don't know about it. What is he going to accuse the Russophiles of doing? He will say, better a Kachkovsky society than nothing in Turka. I'd rather see, the Kachkovsky society was the society of the Russophiles. Better we have that than we have nothing and the Poles have everything. Okay, I would still rather that. But more and more, the Russophiles are doing the Poles' work and the Starostas' work. They're going along with them. They side with the Poles on the elections. And then he comes in what is an amazing coinage of words. He's pretty clever with words. By the way, the word for backwardness in the Ukrainian thing is nazadnitstva, which I think Ukrainians should have adopted. Yes, he didn't believe in nazadnitstva, which I thought was funny. But he at one point says, okay, we have on the one hand the Katsapy. Now the Katsapy in this world means Moscophile. It doesn't mean Russians from Russia. So the Katsapy, look, they serve the Poles. The Katsapy, at first they're in favor of backward Russia. Zubrytsky taunts them saying, I believe that Russian literature should be translated into Ukrainian so you would be able to read it. And then you would find out there are many progressive ideas in Russian literature, so he's not anti-Russian in that sense. He's in favor of this generally. But what you people are doing is beyond all belief. You would rather, in order to save your yacht, you would rather send your children to Polish gymnasia. In order to do this, you would, and so more and more he's attacking the Moscophile among the clergy for selling out to the Poles. Russians are not a real issue in this area. He doesn't see this as, and that they are of course regressive in their support of the Tsar, and that the Russians are trying to destroy the Ruthenian people, and you're on their side. So that's the kind of criticisms he has. And then in this wonderful coinage that I wanted to bring up, and then he says, yeah, we've got those Katsapy, and they are traitors to us. There are fewer of them today, but we still have Polski Katsapy. And what Polski Katsapy means are what many Poles would like to call Genti Rutenes Nacjoni Polones. That is, Ruthenians who side with the Poles. He now calls Polski Katsapy. To understand this wording of this would take a whole sort of thing, but it'll be in the third volume when we're publishing all of his political works on that. So that's where he stands on their cause. And then when he comes most strongly against them is 1912. He writes Nepora Nepora. Of course, they always have the Franco poem to go back to when they need to use it, condemns the Moscophile for what they are doing. And then what I would argue is the breaking point also comes in 1914. So in volume 2 is this wonderful autobiography, diary of Zubrytsky. It's not quite a diary. He writes it 10 days after he's here. He's arrested just as the war begins by a gendarme called Kowalski. He's put in prison. He's now in Berehadolishny. He's moved parishes. and he is sent off with lots of Ukrainian activists to Thalerhof. So what he recounts is the arrest of the active Ukrainian activists. And the reason this is so important is Thalerhof is viewed largely, particularly by Russophile Lemkos, as a Lemko tragedy. It is viewed by Russophiles as a Russophile tragedy. There are elements of truth in both of those things. But in the original arrest, it swept up huge numbers. And in the case of Zubrytsky, he believes that the Poles put him on the list. And then he gives you a long list of all of these Ruthenian priests who are arrested and sent. And it's of interest, he's got a wonderful pen, and why I recommend reading these things are worthwhile. So he says, okay, so they arrest me, then they're sending us down to Peremyśl, the Czech Polki, the sort of Polish nationalist women are pelting us with coal as we're going. They're screaming at us, we're Verräter. He says, and here they put us in a wagon. And we were put, all of us priests, in first and second class wagons. Don't they know that poor village priests never got up to third class before? I'm traveling in the best wagon that I am on my way to Thalerhof, right? Yeah. So and then when they get to Thalerhof, they are put out. It's a dika polya. There's nothing built at Thalerhof at their point, and that's when the attacks on the priests begin, who are put into Thalerhof on those first 2 days. And also then he finds out. So here he was put in the first or second class car, and now they're going to be, particularly they're singling out the priests for physical attacks, and also that there will be no accommodation on any kind of gender sanitation or the way they're being treated. So this first few pages is an account of the first 2 nights or 3 nights in Thalerhof. And now to finish on a good thing, to show you that Austria did good things. So his son Petro worked in a law office in Peremyśl. And so he went to some Krasinski, I know not Krasinski's nationality, could be a Pole, and he got a falsified document that said that my father was evacuated, not arrested. And he goes to Thalerhof, and he gets his father out within, he must have been there all of 48 hours in Thalerhof. And then, because they are evacuating some of the Ukrainian Catholic priests to Slovenia, where they're all going to go to Laibach, and very interesting discussions of his relation with the Slovenians. He has, he later says this, we talk, because of course the Slovenians treat them as Catholics, so there's Catholic solidarity, but of course the Slovenians' major hatred are Catholic Germans, right? So those kind of Catholics are no good. And he says, we talked to the Slovenians, but they couldn't understand us and we couldn't understand them. They couldn't understand, for them, the Germans should be our enemy, and they couldn't understand that your closest neighbor can treat you worse than a distant relative, and that for us, the Poles and the Russians were our enemies, and the Slovenians. So he had a very interesting discussion of Slavophilism that he carries on at that point in time. But and there is a sort of this terminological changes, and he says in the diary that they also were arresting our people, Ukrainci. Right? So it's the first use I find where you admit that the Moscophiles are not us anymore. Right? Because that also is beginning to happen at this time. Until then, I think anything you would have written, you would have Ukraina Rus, they are our people. But now they arrested us Ukrainians, and these people did this. So it's also an interesting moment in what I think, and out of that World War I, of course, for the Moscophiles and Russophiles, it'll be their great decline and their destruction, partially because of the Austrian authorities, and partially because of what happens in these zones. And no one, to my knowledge, has fully studied all of the Thalerhof donose. There are huge numbers of donose in view. And there's no question that you have Ukrainian activists who donosili na Moscofiliu, Poles on so-and-so, Hungarians not knowing what they're doing. But all of that would have to, I think, be studied out more carefully. But but it's of course a great break then not to admit these people as your people, and it's a slow and difficult process going on.